Good morning, evening, or night. Wherever you are, welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Tuesday, 13th May, 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China cautiously welcomed a 90-day pause in the trade war with the United States, even as President-elect Xi Jinping criticized what he described as U.S. bullying. As part of the temporary trade deal, the U.S. is set to reduce the de minimis tariff on Chinese shipments to 54% from 120%. The whiplash tariff policies have added stress to global shipping companies. Chinese manufacturers are rushing shipments in anticipation of the inevitable next crisis. China is aiming for a new industrial revolution by developing AI-powered humanoid robots for factory tasks. China is actively deepening ties with Latin America and the Caribbean. During a summit in Beijing with leaders from the 33-member community of Latin American and Caribbean states, CELAC, BRIOLAC, Xi Jinping pledged $9.20 billion in credit for development in the region and called for countries to stand united against the global trade war. At the summit, China offered a line of credit to Latin American and Caribbean countries, with Brazilian President Lula in attendance. China is expected to ramp up soybean imports from Brazil to reduce reliance on the U.S. amid the trade war, creating opportunities for the region. Meituan plans to launch its Kita food delivery service in Brazil, following its launch in Saudi Arabia, with the deal signing attended by Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in Beijing. Xi Jinping and Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva called for direct talks to end the Ukraine war at their meeting, as both sides call for a more just world order. China is becoming more attractive to top mathematicians due to heavy investment and efforts to encourage more innovative thinking. China warns that Cold War problems could be reheated in the Asia-Pacific region, describing it as a scene of power play by Western entities. Chinese lithium battery exporters are hopeful that the U.S. move to roll back punitive tariffs may revive shipments to the industry's important U.S. market. Manus I has ended its invite-only approach and now offers free registration after a $75 in new funding amid increasing competition from tech giants. Turning to the United States, a temporary trade deal was reached with China, resulting in a 90-day pause in their trade war. The U.S. is set to cut the de minimis tariff on Chinese shipments to 54% from 120%. The $800 de minimis exemption for Chinese postal shipments previously allowed duty-free, low-inspection entry into the U.S. stocks, specifically the Dow and S&P 500, rallied following the announcement of the truce. The temporary trade deal was reached by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, with U.S. officials praising the negotiating style of Chinese counterpart, he laughing at the successful trade talks where Lai Cheng-gang made his debut. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Bank of Japan, BOE, intends to raise rates while monitoring tariffs as global financial markets gain risk appetite from the U.S.-China tariff tensions cool down. Shifting focus to the Cook Islands, the nation has yet to re-engage with Beijing following the signing of agreements that caused a diplomatic row with New Zealand. Regarding ASEAN, China and ASEAN can build trust by upholding local autonomy over foreign agendas and keeping each other accountable to align security interests. Finally, the impact on businesses reveals that a U.S.-owned toy factory in Guangdong province, China, faced order cancellations due to President Donald Trump's 145% tariff on Chinese imports. Hunter Company's CEO, Jason Chung, says his U.S.-owned factory in China, which makes toys for Walmart, will struggle to survive if the tariffs aren't reduced quickly. Honda signals Profit drop as carmakers brace for Trump tariffs and face intense competition in the Chinese market. Tensions between India and Pakistan continue to be high following recent clashes. Prime Minister Narendra Modi declared India has only paused military action. He warned of retaliation for future attacks, targeting terrorist hidayats across the border. Modi affirmed he is monitoring Pakistan's actions closely and reiterated that terror and talks cannot go together. Despite a ceasefire, India killed 3 suspected militants in Kashmir, the first such incident since a tourist attack. Talks are underway to extend the ceasefire, reopening civilian airports and boosting stocks. India's suspension of a key water-sharing treaty with Pakistan remains in effect. A ceremony was held in Jammu for a soldier killed in the conflict. President Donald Trump claimed the U.S. averted a nuclear conflict, a claim government sources deny. A parliamentary committee will discuss the situation. Analysts suggest Japan can assist India in responding to security threats through weapons procurement. Turning to domestic affairs, at least 14 people died in northern India after consuming toxic liquor. A record 14 million air conditioning units were sold in India last year, with residential ownership expected to increase 9-fold by mid-century. Regarding India-China relations, the Indian embassy in Beijing addressed Chinese germanium export restrictions. The matter has been raised with the Chinese side through written representations and meetings. Japan is navigating a challenging economic period as major steelmakers like Nippon Steel brace for fiscal year 2025 profit declines. The automotive sector is also under pressure, with Honda and Nissan projecting significant profit drops. Nissan plans to cut roughly 20,000 jobs worldwide to save $1.70 billion amidst financial loss. Rice prices in Japan have seen their first drop in 18 weeks, settling at 214 yen per 5 kilograms after government stockpiles were released. Simultaneously, gold investment is rising due to global economic downturn, fears related to U.S. tariffs. Berkshire Hathaway is increasing its stakes in Japan's top 5 trading houses, with Warren Buffett hinting at further expansion. Foreign policy sees Sakana AI CEO David Ha suggesting that AI could become a bargaining chip as U.S. foreign policy becomes more U.S.-centric, urging Japan to develop its AI defense capabilities. Japan is watching South Korea's presidential elections closely for potential improvements in relation. Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato will meet U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at the G7 meetings in Canada. Eligibility rules for foreign-born rugby players have been tightened, a notable change given that over half the players in the previous season's Japan Rugby League 1 final were born overseas. The Hiroshima 8000, a new deep-sea probe capable of reaching 8,000 meters, has been unveiled, surpassing its predecessor's 3,500-meter capability. Public opinion is stirred by a South Korean prostitution ring involving Japanese women, sparking online anger. Amidst these national challenges, the head of the global trade watchdog has cautioned that global free trade faces a crisis due to the disruptive trade policies of U.S. President Donald Trump, notably the rapidly fluctuating tariffs. United States defense activities saw a $142 billion sales agreement with Saudi Arabia during Donald Trump's visit to Riyadh. Inflation rates in the U.S. slowed during Trump's tenure, with the annual rate at 230% in April, reported the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Tariffs were later reduced with a 90-day cut to 30% from 145% to aid companies like Shine and Temu in restocking U.S. warehouses. The U.S. also secured the release of Idan Alexander, the last living U.S. citizen held in Gaza, by Hamas, a move hailed by Trump. Bentley reported frozen U.S. car sales due to confusion over tariff reductions related to a UK trade deal. Todd Blanche, formerly Trump's representative, was appointed acting Librarian of Congress after Carla Hayden's dismissal. China demonstrated resilience despite U.S. tariffs, maintaining its economic position even as Trump faced pressure to reduce them. Experts believe the tariff pullback signaled China's successful resistance during the U.S.-China trade conflict. Australia witnessed a landslide victory for the centre-left Labour Party on May 3rd, leading to the formation of a new cabinet and its swearing in. Australia is also taking a leading role in regulating big tech companies regarding children's online activities, including implementing an online ban for those under 16. Saudi Arabia formalized its defense relationship with the U.S. by signing a $142 billion sales agreement during President Trump's visit to Riyadh. Taiwan has been actively testing its newly acquired US-made HIMARS rocket systems. These systems are expected to be crucial in any potential conflict across the Taiwan Strait, and further orders have been placed. India and Pakistan's leaders were commended by Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong, Bangladesh leader Muhammad Yunus, and Nepal PM KPS Ali for their decision to halt operations. Asia-Pacific region is leading in regulating big tech companies concerning children's online activities. Australia's under-16 ban is part of broader measures, including Malaysia's implementation of licensing demands. United Kingdom's King Charles is set to welcome French President Emmanuel Macron for a state visit in July, featuring accommodation at Windsor Castle and a formal state banquet. Amidst controversy, Downing Street has defended Keir Starmer's comments on immigration, even as they drew comparisons to Enoch Powell's infamous Rivers of Blood speech. A man has been arrested on suspicion of arson following an overnight fire at Prime Minister Keir Starmer's London residence, prompting a police investigation. In a separate legal matter, 6 Bulgarians were handed prison sentences of up to nearly 11 years after being convicted of spying for Russia within the UK. A man wrongly convicted of murder and imprisoned for 38 years has had his conviction overturned based on new DNA evidence. Al-Haq, a Palestinian rights organization, and the Global Legal Action Network are pursuing legal action against the UK concerning the export of F-35 components to Israel. Turning to Taiwan, the nation executed its inaugural live-fire exercise, utilizing the US-supplied HIMARS, High Mobility Rocket System, a system previously deployed by Ukraine against Russia and deemed crucial in potential cross-strait confrontation. Focusing on Ukraine and Russia, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed his readiness to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Ankara, Turkey, to engage in peace negotiations, with President Trump offering to join the talk. However, the Kremlin has yet to confirm Putin's participation. Pope Leo XIV has communicated with the Ukrainian president and appealed to news outlets to avoid using language that incites division. Saudi Arabia witnessed the jailing of Ahmed al-Daush, a British national, for 10 years over a deleted tweet, prompting scrutiny of the UK's response, despite Foreign Office involvement in his hearing. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman extended a warm welcome to U.S. President Donald Trump as he embarked on a 4-day West Asia tour, symbolized by the intertwined American and Saudi flags adorning Riyadh. This marked the commencement of Trump's first major international trip of his second term, with subsequent visits planned to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Trump's visit was heavily oriented towards solidifying economic deals and diplomatic ties, with ambitions of securing financial agreements potentially exceeding $1 trillion, thereby emphasizing his business interests in the region. During his stay, President Trump met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and other Saudi officials at the Royal Palace in Riyadh, focusing on making deals. A highlight of the visit was the signing of a $142 billion deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, which the White House described as the largest defense sales agreement in history. Turning to the United States, President Donald Trump announced the potential for significantly increased tariffs against China if a long-term trade agreement was not achieved within a 90-day timeframe. Russia faced international condemnation as the ICAO held them accountable for the downing of MS-17 over Ukraine. The ruling stated Russia violated international law by using weapons against civil aircraft. All 298 people on board died. Donald Trump offered to participate in direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul. Turning to Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed openness to peace talks with Russia if Vladimir Putin participates. The conflict continues to draw international attention and diplomatic efforts. The downing of MS-17 remains a contentious issue. In the United Kingdom, a Bulgarian man was sentenced to over 10 years in prison for leading a Russian spy ring. 6 Bulgarians received prison sentences for spying for Russia. The longest sentence was nearly 11 years. The United States saw key diplomats engaged in discussions about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This followed Donald Trump's offer to mediate between the two nations. Germany has outlawed the far-right Reich citizens and Kingdom of Germany movements, arresting Peter Fitzek, a leader of the latter. These groups reject the legitimacy of the German state. The Hohenzollern family concluded a 99-year legal battle with the state over art ownership. Germany faces economic challenges from U.S. tariffs and a general slowdown. EU membership limits Germany's independent economic responses. German companies are reassessing U.S. investments due to this uncertainty. The new finance minister proposed a €1 trillion spending plan for defense and infrastructure, raising questions about EU fiscal rules. Israel saw the release of Israeli-American hostage Idan Alexander by Hamas after 584 days of captivity, an event that occurred during a pause in fighting in Gaza. Alexander, who was serving in the Israeli army, was freed in what Hamas described as a goodwill gesture toward the Trump administration, amid growing pressure to secure the release of our citizens held hostage. Adding to the complexities in Gaza, food security experts are warning of a critical risk of famine if Israel does not end its blockade, with an estimated 500,000 Palestinians facing starvation. An Israeli air attack on the Nasser medical complex in southern Gaza resulted in at least 2 deaths, including that of journalist Hassan Daoud. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has vowed a full-force offensive in Gaza despite international backlash and has outlined plans to relocate Palestinians. Argentina's Supreme Court uncovered a trove of Nazi propaganda from 1941 within its basement archive. These documents aim to spread Hitler's ideology in Argentina. The find is considered globally significant for revealing details about Nazi activities in Argentina during World War II. Supreme Court President Horacio Rosati has initiated a thorough review. Meanwhile, an Argentinian court issued an international arrest warrant for Aung San Suu Kyi, the former leader of Myanmar, who is currently imprisoned by the military junta. In the latest from Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is facing increasing pressure to address the housing crisis. Rising interest rates and limited housing supply have made home ownership unaffordable for many Canadians. The government is considering various measures, including increasing housing construction and implementing policies to curb speculative investment. Recent reports indicate that housing prices have begun to stabilize in some markets, but affordability remains a significant concern nationwide. Shifting gears to Brazil, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is working to strengthen environmental protections in the Amazon rainforest. Deforestation rates have risen in recent years, prompting international concern. Lula's administration is increasing funding for environmental enforcement and working with indigenous communities to protect their land rights. Brazil is also seeking international cooperation to combat illegal logging and mining in the Amazon. South Korea recently saw its World Ramen Festival in Busan marred by complaints. Attendees voiced concerns over organization, limited food options, and overall food quality. Shifting to campaign strategies, Lee Jae-myung's team is contemplating the use of bulletproof screens at public appearances. This mirrors security measures seen in the United States. Meanwhile, an incident in Toulouse, France, involving the verbal abuse of South Korean live streamer Jinity has ignited public anger. The event has prompted a police investigation and raised broader concerns about anti-Asian racism and public safety. The United States, under the Trump administration, controversially granted refugee status to 59 white South Africans, known as Afrikaners. This decision was influenced by claims, amplified by then-President Donald Trump, of a genocide against Afrikaners in South Africa. However, South Africa itself refuted any systematic persecution. The Episcopal Church's Migration Service responded to the situation with a firm stance. The church, led by presiding Bishop Sean Rowe, declared it would not participate in the resettlement of these Afrikaner refugees. This decision was rooted in the church's dedication to racial justice and reconciliation efforts. Mexico is grappling with political violence as a mayoral candidate from the governing party was assassinated in Veracruz, casting a shadow over upcoming elections. The nation's leader has voiced strong objections to the United States' temporary ban on Mexican beef imports, citing screwworm concerns as an unjust trade barrier. On a brighter note, Mexican researchers have pioneered a probiotic-infused wheat tortilla, offering a novel solution for food preservation. Denmark has taken over the Arctic Council's chairmanship from Norway. The shift occurs during rising Arctic security concerns. It also coincides with renewed attention on Greenland's geopolitical position. In Greenland, Håkon Boasen is pushing for independence. He wants Greenland to separate from Denmark. Boasen also advocates for closer ties with the United States. He is a bricklayer who has become a political influencer. His views are reportedly influenced by his admiration for former U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump had previously expressed interest in the U.S. annexing Greenland. The United States is seeing top Senate Democrats, led by Cory Booker, push for a censure vote against Donald Trump's plan. This plan involves accepting a $400 million luxury jet from the Qatari royal family. The Democrats argue that accepting such a gift from a foreign government requires congressional approval, a step Trump has not taken. Trump, however, has defended his position, calling the offer a very nice gesture. He believes refusing the jet would be stupid, dismissing ethical concerns surrounding the transaction. The United States is set to deepen its economic ties with Gulf nations as President Donald Trump embarks on a 4-day tour of the Middle East. Concurrently, the U.S. has received the first cohort of Afrikaner refugees asserting persecution in South Africa, with Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau and Homeland Security Deputy Secretary present to welcome them. Turning to China, exporters are gradually resuming shipments to the United States after a surprise tariff reduction. However, Chinese exporters remain wary, closely monitoring policy developments while diversifying into local and Southeast Asian markets to hedge against future uncertainties. South Africa's socio-political climate has prompted the U.S. to accept Afrikaner refugees, citing persecution. The refugees' arrival underscores growing concerns about the safety and security of minority groups within South Africa. France is currently navigating a period of intense scrutiny following deadly riots in Nouméa, New Caledonia, which underscore long-standing tensions regarding the territory's potential independence. New Caledonia's president, Alcide Ponga, is tasked with addressing the deep political fractures exposed by these events. Adding to the nation's concerns, France condemned a disinformation campaign targeting President Macron, UK Labour leader Keir Starmer, and German CDU leader Friedrich Merz. These allegations falsely portrayed a white tissue as a bag of cocaine in a photograph. In another development, actor Gérard Depardieu was convicted of sexually assaulting 2 women during a 2021 film shoot, receiving an 18-month suspended prison sentence and placement on the sex offenders list. The United States finds itself in a trade dispute with Canada, triggered by tariffs enacted during President Trump's administration. This has led to significant economic repercussions. Honda, for example, has decided to move production operations from Canada to the US. This decision also involves abandoning earlier plans for a substantial electric vehicle manufacturing plant within Canada. Turning to Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney is actively presenting himself as the most capable leader to address the ongoing trade war. His recent meeting with President Trump at the White House underscores this effort. In the United States, the imposed tariffs have sparked considerable debate. Discussions are centered on the value and necessity of trade relations with Canada. Key sectors, including autos, energy, and lumber, are anticipated to potentially experience adverse effects from the current trade tensions. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is focused on strengthening ties with China, with aims to build indestructible relations against the backdrop of potential global uncertainty, possibly influenced by a future Trump administration. As part of this initiative, Lula da Silva conducted a 4-day state visit to China. He was accompanied by 11 ministers, prominent politicians, and 150 business leaders, and he met with President Xi Jinping and other Latin American and Caribbean leaders in Beijing. This visit highlights Brazil's dedication to increasing collaboration with China. In related business news, Bide's factory in Brazil, a crucial market for the company outside of China, is experiencing delays, but is expected to be fully operational by the end of 2026. The factory has a projected annual production capacity of 150,000 electric vehicles. China's President Xi Jinping urged greater global cooperation during a recent address. Simultaneously, a report emanating from China's defense sector highlighted a strategic shift towards prioritizing advanced intelligence systems over conventional weaponry in military application. Adding to its growing global influence, China is increasingly attracting leading mathematicians from around the world. Tensions remain high as Pakistan reports a devastating series of clashes with India, resulting in over 50 casualties last week. A fragile ceasefire is now in effect, bringing a temporary halt to the most intense fighting witnessed in recent decades. In response to perceived threats, Pakistan has activated a sophisticated ABC defense system. This system integrates radar technology, fighter jets, and airborne early warning aircraft. The move aims to bolster Pakistan's defensive capabilities, particularly in relation to India. Syria witnessed the recovery of remains thought to belong to 30 people killed by its militants. Qatar and the FBI are assisting in the identification process through DNA testing. However, Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa will not participate in the Arab League summit in Iraq this week. The invitation extended to Syria has caused deep divisions within the League. In a development that could reshape regional dynamics, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PPK, announced plans to disarm and disband. This significant step follows appeals from Mr. Öcalan, urging the group to lay down arms and cease operations. The decision could have profound implications for neighboring countries impacted by PKK activity. Indonesia was recently the site of a tragic explosion at a military disposal site. The blast killed 13 people, including soldiers, during the disposal of expired munition. This is the second incident of its kind in just over a year, prompting a thorough investigation. Authorities will examine the cause of the explosion and evaluate existing safety procedures. Turning to Australia, Prime Minister Albanese recently visited Indonesia. His meeting with Indonesian President-elect Prabowo Subianto highlights the strategic importance of the region. This visit underscores Australia's commitment to maintaining strong diplomatic ties with its Southeast Asian neighbors. Vietnam is seeing a dramatic turn in the case of Truong My Lan, the property tycoon facing a possible death sentence for her role in a massive $27 billion bank fraud, who has proposed restructuring her undervalued assets in an attempt to repay the embezzled funds. In other news, Vietnam's finance ministry is taking aim at counterfeit goods, issuing a directive to combat the trade of fakes, specifically targeting Gucci bags, Samsung devices, and Lego bricks, potentially to avoid tariffs from the United States. Peru recently celebrated Pope Leo XIV in Chiclayo, where he had previously served as bishop for about 8 years. A mass and dance performances took place in front of the cathedral. The local community considers Pope Leo XIV one of their own, and greatly values his past connection to the city. European leaders are intensifying pressure on Russia, demanding an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. They warned Moscow of new sanctions if it fails to comply with their demand. Shifting focus to the United States, former President Trump proposed a meeting involving the presidents of Ukraine and Russia. Trump hinted at his own possible involvement in facilitating such discussion. Bangladesh's political landscape is shifting as the interim government deregistered a former ruling party, barring them from contesting the approaching election. Adding to the tension, a government advisor cautioned that individuals expressing online support for the Awami League Party might face arrest. In neighboring India, the government is facing renewed scrutiny over its environmental policies. India recently approved the construction of several new coal-fired power plants, despite mounting concerns about air quality and carbon emissions. This decision has sparked criticism from environmental groups who argue that it contradicts India's commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions under international climate agreements. Malaysia is currently grappling with concerns over women's safety after the abduction of Pamela Ling, leading women's rights groups to decry systemic failures in protection. The search for Ling has now extended into neighboring Singapore as authorities broaden their investigation. In related news, Malaysia faces increasing pressure to combat power theft by cryptocurrency miners with more robust legal framework. Experts estimate that illegal mining activities contribute to overuse $100 million in power losses, potentially linked to money laundering and tax evasion. Philippines is poised to see former President Rodrigo Duterte reclaim his mayoral seat in Davao City, a position he held for 20 years before his presidential term, despite his current detention in The Hague over alleged crimes against humanity. Simultaneously, a volcano in the central region of the Philippines had a short-lived eruption, resulting in a 2.8-mile ash plume rising into the sky. Senegal is grappling with dual crises of environmental degradation and economic hardship. Illegal overfishing, often perpetrated by foreign vessels employing destructive methods, has dramatically depleted local fish stocks. A London-based environmental organization reports this depletion is directly linked to a rise in irregular migration from Senegal to Spain, as fishing communities lose their livelihoods. Compounding these issues, the Kédougou region is facing a severe health crisis due to the pervasive use of mercury in artisanal gold mining. Women and children are particularly vulnerable to mercury exposure, posing significant long-term health risks. El Salvador faces scrutiny as a lawsuit has been filed with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The suit seeks the release of Venezuelan migrants. These migrants were deported from the United States to El Salvador. They are now imprisoned in a Salvadoran prison. The legal challenge highlights concerns about their detention. Libya's capital, Tripoli, witnessed intense armed clashes triggered by the assassination of Abdel Ghani al-Kikli, also known as Ganiwa. Ganiwa was a prominent militia leader who commanded the support force apparatus, SA. The violent infighting between various heavily armed militias led to at least 6 fatalities, including Ganiwa. The clashes underscore the ongoing instability and power struggles within the country. Turkey is actively engaged in diplomatic efforts to foster peace in the region. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is scheduled to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. There is also consideration for Russian President Vladimir Putin to join them for peace talks. Simultaneously, Turkey is closely monitoring developments related to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, following the PKK's announcement that it is ending its decades-long armed conflict with the Turkish state. Turkey aims to secure lasting peace through the group's complete disbandment. Singaporean health officials are vigilant about rising COVID-19 cases, predicting recurrent waves akin to other endemic respiratory illnesses as immunity decreases. In another matter, a Singaporean teenage girl was caught vaping space oil near the courts. The vape was found to contain etomidate, a substance prohibited in Hong Kong. Albania is set to see Edi Rama secure a 4th term as Prime Minister, his Socialist Party having won a clear electoral victory. This result is considered vital for the nation's EU membership ambitions, with voters largely backing the Socialists' pro-EU stance. The Czech Republic is witnessing a notable shift, with arms manufacturing potentially overtaking the automotive sector as a key economic force. Simultaneously, a new museum in Brno now stands at the location of a former textile factory that once functioned as a concentration camp. The museum is dedicated to honoring Oskar Schindler's courageous actions in saving approximately 1,200 Jewish lives during the Holocaust. Papua New Guinea saw a hostage escape her captors, increasing optimism for the liberation of others still held. Adding to the nation's triumphs, Papua New Guinea's women's cricket team, the Luas, achieved full one-day international OD status, a designation that lasts through the next international cricket cycle, up to 2029, marking a significant achievement in the country's sporting endeavors. Yemen remains a focal point of international concern as President Trump declared victory over the Houthi militia. This announcement comes despite the group's persistent attacks on ships and the downing of drones. The U.S. military has expended significant resources in the region. New Zealand is on alert after a measles case surfaced in Auckland, raising concerns among Pacific health experts. Musician George Thorogood plans to perform 3 shows in New Zealand with Z's Top Diet. Chile's President Gabriel Boric recently met with China's Xi Jinping in Beijing, along with other Latin American leaders. Xi Jinping suggested expanding trade relations beyond commodities, especially considering tariffs previously imposed by former U.S. President Donald Trump. The British government is facing opposition to its proposed AI copyright law reforms. The legislation aims to grant AI model developers access to copyrighted content without needing creator permission in specific situations. Climate change is significantly impacting agriculture in Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation. Increasing water scarcity is worsening food security problems in the country. In Myanmar, airstrikes by the junta struck a school on Monday day. This attack resulted in 22 deaths, including 20 children, despite an alleged humanitarian ceasefire. Recent drone strikes by the RSF on Port Sudan have heightened regional tensions in Sudan. These strikes have also spotlighted the country's expanding gold economy. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.